the wind in the Wyoming highlands never stopped. It was the first thing you learned and the last thing you forgot. It drove the grit under your collar and into your bread. It scoured the paint from the house and the hope from your heart. Clara Stetson kept her back to that wind as the preacher said his final words over the plain pine box. The dirt, dry and stingy, rattled on the lid. It was a poor sound, a final, hollow sound that sealed her future. He was gone. Her father, the man who had carved this ranch from the rock and sage, was in the ground. She stood alone, a woman of 28 who felt closer to 58. Her brother, Luke, stood beside her, his small hand gripping hers. At 12, he was too young to be the man of the house, but the title was his now, whether he wanted it or not. Clara felt the weight of him, the weight of the 2,000 acres, the weight of the 300 head of cattle, and the crushing weight of the note at the bank in Cheyenne. The neighbors, the few who had braved the ride, offered condolences that felt as dry as the land. They saw a woman undone, a ranch ripe for the picking. Clara gave them nothing. She kept her spine straight, her face hard under the brim of her father's hat. She nodded once to the preacher, gripped Luke's shoulder, and walked away from the new grave without looking back. The ranch was dying. Her father's illness had taken the last of their savings, and the drought had taken the rest. The cattle were thin, the hay scarce. The debt was a shadow that followed her from the barn to the house, from sunup to sundown. She needed help. She needed muscle. She needed it cheap. He arrived 2 days later, walking out of the heat haze like a ghost. He was tall, broad in the shoulder, and carried nothing but a bedroll and a canteen. He moved with a quiet economy, as if saving his energy was a habit born of long hardship. His face was stark, all angles and shadow, cut by a thin white scar that ran from his jaw into his collar. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of gunmetal, worn and old, as if he had seen far too much of the world and none of be it good. He stopped 10 feet from the porch. He did not speak, just watched her. "You looking for work?" Clara's voice was rough, rusted by dust and disuse. He nodded once. "Name's Eli Mercer." His voice was low, soft-spoken, and seemed out of place in such a large man. "You have references?" "No, ma'am." "Experience?" "Some." Clara studied him. He was a drifter, plain and simple, the kind that brought trouble or ran from it, usually both, but she was desperate. And he looked strong. She could not afford to be picky. "I can pay $30 a month and keep—" "You'll bunk in the barn. You'll be up before the sun and work until it's down. The work is hard, the food is plain, and I don't abide laziness or drink." He nodded again. "That's fine." A flicker of something, anger, pride, desperation, made her add one more thing. She needed the boundary clear, as sharp as a barbed wire fence. She would not have him, or anyone, thinking she was a weak woman in need of pity or protection. "Let's be clear. Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice dropping, the words clipped and cold. "You are here only as a ranch hand. You are muscle. You will take my orders. You will do your job, and you will keep to yourself. I am your boss, not your friend. Is that understood?" Eli Mercer looked at her for a long moment. His gaze was steady, unblinking. He did not flinch from her hardness, nor did he challenge it. He simply absorbed it. "Yes, ma'am," he said, just as quietly as before. He accepted the job silently, and in the days that followed, Clara found he was a man of few words and endless work. He moved into the barn, into the small, dusty stall next to the tack. He asked for nothing, not a lamp, not a mattress, not an extra blanket. He rose in the dark, the first sound of the morning, the quiet scrape of his boots on the packed earth. Clara would find him already at it when she came out with the coffee, the kerosene lamp in the barn casting a yellow glow on his broad back. He was mending tack, sharpening tools, or currying the horses. He worked harder than any man she'd ever hired, harder than her father had in his last good years. He worked without complaint, his movements fluid and efficient. There was a rhythm to him, a steadiness that stood against the harsh, chaotic land. And the land was harsh. The Stetson ranch was high country, pressed against the unforgiving foothills. It was a place of dry hills covered in cheatgrass and sage, where the wind blew so hard it seemed to come from inside the ground. Rattlesnakes sunned themselves on the porch steps. Coyotes yipped and howled in the canyons at night, their voices a thin, sharp warning. Sudden dust storms would rise from the west, choking the air with alkali grit that stung the eyes and coated the tongue. It was a land that demanded everything and gave back nothing you did not bleed for. It was a mirror, Clara often thought, to her own life. She carried her own harshness, her own internal desolation. 3 years ago, she had been ruined. That was the word the town used. Ruined. Clara had to go to town once a week for supplies, a journey she dreaded more than a blizzard. The town of Laram's Point was a collection of false front buildings and narrow mines. When she walked the boardwalk, the whispers followed her like flies. She saw them. Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's wife, her mouth a tight purse, Mr. Slocum, the mercantile owner, his eyes sliding over her with a mix of pity and contempt. They remembered. They would always remember. The gossip was simple and ugly. Clara Stetson, proud and high-nosed, had engaged in an affair with a married man, Nathaniel Finch, a handsome, smooth-talking land speculator from Cheyenne. He had come, seen her, and conquered. He had whispered of love, of a future, of a life away from the dust. And she, starved for affection and blinded by loneliness, had believed him. The truth was more tragic and far more common. He had not loved her. He had used her. He had seduced her with practiced ease, taken what he wanted, and abandoned her when his wife arrived unexpectedly. The town, in its righteous fury, had turned its scorn not on the powerful, wealthy man who had broken his vows, but on the woman he had left behind. Clara was the homewrecker. Clara was the shame. Nathaniel Finch was gone, his reputation intact. Clara was still here, an outcast in her own home, branded by a scandal she had not sought. She ignored the gossip, or pretended to. She held her head high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Her orders at the mercantile clipped and precise, but beneath the ice, the shame churned. It was a cold, heavy stone in her gut. She had been a fool. She had trusted, and she had been broken. It was a mistake she would never make again. Her focus was a shield. There was only the ranch, and there was only Luke. Survival. That was all that mattered. Eli Mercer paid the town no mind. He loaded the wagon with the sacks of flour and beans, his face impassive as the whispers eddied around him. He seemed not to see the stairs, or if he did not care. He was a rock, and the small, dirty waves of town gossip broke against him and vanished. He proved capable, more than capable. He had a quiet knowledge of the land, of animals, of the 100 small tasks that made up a ranch. He did not just repair fences. He reset the posts deep and strung the wire tight, built to last. He found the breaks in the line her father had patched and redid them proper. One afternoon, Clara found him in the round pen with the wild bay gelding, a horse her father had given up on. Eli was not breaking the horse. He was talking to it. His voice was a low murmur, the same quiet tone he used for everything. He moved slowly, patiently, letting the horse smell him, touch him, until the gelding, slick with nervous sweat, finally lowered its head and allowed Eli to rest a hand on its neck. Clara watched for 20 minutes, hidden by the corner of the barn, before turning away. A week later, the sickness took her. It came on fast, a fever and a gut-wrenching ache that left her weak and trembling. She collapsed on her bed, the world spinning into a gray fog. She was aware, barely, of Luke's small, scared face. She drifted. She woke to the smell of stew, not her own thin, watery broth, but a thick, rich stew heavy with salt pork and wild onions. She sat up, her head swimming. The fever had broken. She found Luke at the kitchen table, a spoon in his hand, a look of relief on his face. "Eli made it," he said, pointing to the pot on the stove. "He said you needed to eat." Clara looked at the stew. He had been in her kitchen. He had gone through her pantry, used her pot, It was an invasion, a crossing of the line she had drawn so clearly. But the stew smelled warm and safe, and she was so hungry. She ate, and as the warmth spread through her, she felt something other than anger. It confused her. He said nothing about it. The next morning, he was back in the barn, mending a bridle, as if he had never left. The first crack in her armor came on a Tuesday night. The day had been long, a failed search for a dozen missing head, and Clara was tired down to the bone. She was about to go inside when she heard voices from the barn. Luke and Eli. She moved to the barn door. Staying in the shadows? The interior was lit by a single lantern. Eli was sitting on an overturned bucket, and Luke was on a hay bale beside him, a tattered copy of their father's Bible open on his lap. The mountain, Luke stuttered. He was a smart boy, but the reading always tied his tongue in knots. Close, Eli's voice rumbled. That's a big word. Break it down. Mountain, mountain. See, you know it. Mountain, Luke repeated, the word coming out smooth this time. Good. Now, this next one. Strength. Strength. Clara stood frozen, her hand clutching the rough wood of the door frame. She had tried to teach Luke, but her patience was thin, worn away by worry. She snapped at him, made him nervous. Eli. He was different. He was calm. He was patient. He made the boy feel steady. She watched as Eli pointed to the words, his large, calloused finger tracing the lines, his quiet voice guiding her brother through the valley of the shadow of death. He was gentle. A man she had hired for his muscle was sitting in the hay, gently teaching her brother to read. A knot formed in her throat, thick and painful. It was an ache she did not recognize. She backed away silently. The image of the two of them, their heads bent over the book in the yellow light, burned into her mind. The storm came 3 nights later. It rolled in from the north, a towering wall of black and purple clouds that swallowed the stars. The air became still, heavy, and smelled of ozone. The first crash of thunder was so loud it shook the house. Luke yelped and ran to Clara's side. Then the lightning came, not in flashes, but in great, jagged rips that lit the entire ranch in a stark, blue-white light. In one of those flashes, Clara saw it. The cattle, spooked by the noise, were moving. They were running, heading for the south pasture, toward the deep arroyo. "Oh, God, no!" she whispered. Before she could even grab her coat, the back door slammed open. Eli stood there, already in his slicker, his hat pulled low. "The cattle!" he yelled over the rising wind. "They're running for the washout. We can't stop them in this. We'll lose them." "We'll lose them for good if they go over that edge," he said. He was already running toward the barn, toward the horses. Clara did not think. She grabbed her own slicker and ran after him. They saddled the horses in a frenzy, the animals rearing and snorting as the thunder cracked directly overhead. They rode into the teeth of the storm. The rain came down in sheets, a cold, driving deluge that turned the ground to sucking mud. It was black as pitch. Save for the moments the lightning lit the world. She saw the herd just ahead, a mass of dark, terrified shapes. Eli was already there, riding at the edge, trying to turn the leaders. His horse slipped, went to its knees, but he hauled it up with a strength that seemed superhuman. "Head them!" he roared at her. "To the high ground!" Clara rode, her heart in her throat. She was a good rider, but this was madness. The wind ripped at her, the rain blinded her. A bolt of lightning struck a cottonwood not 50 yards away, and the tree exploded in a shower of white splinters. Her horse screamed and reared, and she clung to the saddle horn, her knuckles white. She saw Eli ride straight into the panicked herd, a dark shape against the chaos. He was turning them, slowly, painfully, pushing them back from the crumbling edge of the arroyo. He was risking his life, his horse, for her cattle. For cattle he had no stake in. It took more than an hour of shouting, of hard riding, of pure, adrenaline-fueled terror. Finally, the herd, exhausted, was pushed into the shelter of a small box canyon, and the worst of the storm passed over them, rumbling away to the east. They were soaked, drenched to the bone, cold and shaking. Eli rode up to her, his face a pale mask in the gloom. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. Yes. Are they all here?" "Most of them," he said. "We lost a few, but the herd is safe." They rode back to the barn in silence, the rain settling into a steady, miserable drizzle. When they got inside, and the lantern was lit, she saw him clearly. He was bleeding. A long, deep gash ran down his forearm, from a branch or a rock. She did not know. His face was streaked with mud, and a dark bruise was already forming on his cheek. But his eyes were calm. "You're hurt," she said, her voice sounding thin. "It's nothing. It's not nothing. Sit." She pointed to the hay bale, the same one Luke had sat on. She pushed her shaking, wet hair out of her face and went to the tack room for the box of liniment and bandages. Her hands were shaking. She could not stop them. The adrenaline was leaving her, and the cold was setting in. But it was more than that. He had saved her herd. He had risked his life. She came back and knelt in the straw in front of him. "Give me your arm." He did, unbuttoning the cuff of his wet shirt and pushing up the sleeve. The gash was ugly, deep and full of grit. "This will sting," she said. "Go ahead." She poured the carbolic water over the wound, her hands trembling so badly she spilled half of it. He did not move, did not even hiss. She cleaned the cut, her fingers clumsy, her breath catching in her chest. She was so close to him. She could smell the rain on him, the scent of horse and sweat and the metallic tang of his blood. He was solid, a wall of heat in the cold barn. As she wrapped the bandage, her fingers brushed against his. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. He did not pull away. He just sat there, watching her, his gaze steady. The silence in the barn was thick, charged. The only sound was the rain on the roof and the sound of her own heart, hammering against her ribs. She finished tying the bandage, her hands lingering for a second too long. She looked up at him. His eyes were on her face, his expression unreadable. Clara pulled her hand back as if burned. She stood up, suddenly aware of how wet her clothes were, how close she was to this man, this drifter, in the middle of the night. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt small, inadequate. "For the herd." "It's my job, ma'am," Eli said, his voice low. She nodded, unable to speak, and fled the barn. That night, Clara lay in her bed, the sheets cold against her skin. The wind howled outside, but the storm was inside her now. She was still shaking. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the night, the lightning, the panic, the ride, and the barn. She could still feel the brush of his fingers. It was nothing, a simple, accidental touch. But it was the first kind touch, the first touch that was not her brother's, that she had felt in 3 years. It was a touch that asked for nothing, expected nothing. It was just there. Clara Stetson, the hard woman who refused pity, the woman who had built a wall of ice around her heart, turned her face into her pillow. And for the first time since her father's funeral, she silently cried. After the storm, the ranch settled into a new, uneasy rhythm. The lines Clara had drawn in the dust were now blurred, washed away by the rain and by a single, accidental touch in the dark. A tension had set in, a static in the air that hummed between her and Eli Mercer. She struggled to hide it. She tried to recapture the coldness, the distance. She made her orders at breakfast sharp, her voice clipped. She spoke to his back, to the air, to a spot on the wall just past his shoulder. But it was no use. His presence lingered. It was no longer just the presence of a hired hand. It was the presence of a man who had seen her shake, who had cleaned her wounds, who had sat with her brother in the lamplight. It was, she admitted in the secret, silent parts of her mind, a comfort, a strange, grounding comfort. He was a rock, quiet and steady, in the shifting, treacherous landscape of her life. He was the first person in 3 years who had looked at her without pity, without scorn, and without wanting something. He just was. And that, more than anything, terrified her. She found herself watching him. She would glance out the kitchen window and see him mending the corral fence, the muscles in his back moving with a smooth, practiced power. He never rushed. He never made a wasted motion. He would pause, look at the horizon, and take a deep breath, as if tasting the wind. Luke, however, had no such reservations. The boy, starved for a male presence, now followed Eli everywhere. He chattered, he asked questions, he handed him tools. Eli never shooed him away. He would listen to Luke's endless stories, answer his questions with simple, direct words, and occasionally, a small, almost invisible smile would touch the corner of his mouth. Clara watched this too, a familiar ache in her throat. She was grateful, and she resented the gratitude. She had told him to keep to himself. He was not keeping to himself. He was, with his silence and his capability, weaving himself into the fabric of their lives, and she did not know how to stop him. One morning, she went to the barn earlier than usual, a list of tasks ready on her tongue. The sun was just a pink smear in the east, the air cool and smelling of dust and sweet clover. She pushed open the heavy barn door and stepped inside, the words dying in her throat. He was there, brushing the mare. The horse, usually skittish, stood perfectly still, her head low with contentment, and Eli was humming. It was not a tune, it was a melody, a low, quiet sound in his chest, almost a whisper, a simple 5-note phrase, repeated over and over. Clara froze. Her hand flew to her mouth, her blood turning to ice. She knew that tune. It was not a common one. It was a lullaby from the old country, a strange, sad little song her mother, dead these 10 years, used to sing to her when she was a child, to calm her nightmares. She had not heard it since. She must have made a sound, a small gasp, because he stopped. The humming cut off. He turned, the brush still in his hand. His eyes, usually calm, were wary. He had been caught in a private moment. "Where did you learn that?" Clara's voice was a ragged whisper. It did not sound like her own. Eli looked at her, his face unreadable. He seemed to weigh his answer, his gaze dropping to the brush in his hand, then back to her. He was a man who did not like questions. "It was just a tune," he said, his voice quiet. "No," she insisted, taking a step forward. The barn felt small, the air thick. "It's not, please, where did you hear it?" He saw the desperation in her face, the raw need. He gave a small, weary sigh, as if a door to a painful room had been opened. "From someone I lost," he said. He offered no more. His eyes told her not to ask. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. Clara stared at him, her heart hammering. A dozen questions fought to get out. Who? Your mother, a wife, a child. But she saw the scar on his jaw, the deep, old weariness in his eyes. And she knew this was his fence. This was his boundary. Sharp and clear. She had pushed. He had not yielded. But he had not lied. He had given her a small, hard piece of his truth. Clara swallowed, the knot in her throat now a hot, aching pain. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. She turned and walked out of the barn, the list of tasks forgotten. It was 2 days later that Silas Rook came to call. Clara saw his buggy from a mile off, a black, shiny speck kicking up a plume of dust. Rook was a land baron, a vulture in a tailored suit. He had bought up 2 smaller ranches to the east, squeezing them out with his money and his lawyers. He had been circling the Stetson ranch since her father first got sick. She was on the porch when he pulled up, Luke hiding behind her skirts. Eli was shoeing the gelding by the barn, the rhythmic clang of his hammer the only sound. "Miss Stetson," Rook said. Stepping down, he was a thick man, his face flushed with easy living, his waistcoat straining over a prosperous belly. He smelled of cigars and bay rum. He removed his hat, revealing hair so slick and black it looked like a cap of oil. "Mr. Rook," Clara said, her voice flat. She did not invite him to sit. "A sad time for you, Clara, a sad time." His voice was coated in false sympathy. "Your father was a good man, A bit stubborn, perhaps, but a good man. He was, Clara said. And he left you. Well, he left you with a great deal. Rook gestured to the ranch, but his smile was a sneer. He was not looking at the land. He was looking at the peeling paint, the sagging fence line, the general air of decay. I'm not selling, Clara said. Rook laughed. A short, moist chuckle. Always direct, you Stetsons. I respect that, but let's be sensible. This is a lot of land for a single woman and a boy. The bank in Cheyenne. They are not patient men. I, on the other hand, am very patient. I'm managing, Clara said, her hands clenching at her sides. Are you? Rook took a step onto the porch, invading her space. Clara stood her ground. I hear things in town. I hear the herd is thin. I hear the debt is considerable. And I hear, his voice dropped, his eyes sliding over her, that your reputation is not what it once was. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. It was one thing to hear the whispers. It was another to have it thrown at her on her own porch. It's a hard world, Clara, Rook said, his tone now oily and intimate. A woman needs a protector. A woman who is ruined. Well, she has very few options. I am offering you a clean one. Sell to me. I'll give you a fair price. Enough to set you and the boy up in a small house in town. A new start. Get off my land, Clara whispered, her voice shaking with a cold, pure rage. Now, Clara, don't be hasty. The hammering from the barn had stopped. Clara had not even heard him move. But suddenly, Eli was there. He came up the porch steps, not fast, but with a deliberate, heavy tread. He was taller than Rook by a head, wider by a foot. He was streaked with sweat and soot from the forge, and he still held the heavy smithing hammer in one hand. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at Rook. He simply stepped between them. He stood, a towering, silent wall of muscle and iron, and stared at the horizon. He said nothing. He did not have to. His very presence was a threat, as potent and primal as a grizzly bear. Silas Rook, for the first time, lost his smile. He looked at Eli, his eyes narrowing, taking in the size of the man, the scar, the war-worn eyes, and the hammer. He looked back at Clara, his face mottling with anger. So, Rook sneered, his bravado returning, but tinnier now. This is how it is. You've replaced your father with a common, hired brute. It seems your tastes have simplified. Since Mr. Finch left town. Eli's head turned, just slightly. A muscle in his scarred jaw twitched. I said, Clara's voice was louder now, sharp as glass. Get off my land, now, or I'll have Mr. Mercer remove you. Rook held his ground for a second. Then his gaze flicked back to Eli, who had not moved, had not blinked. Rook scoffed, a pathetic attempt to regain control. You'll regret this, Miss Stetson. You're making a terrible mistake. This land will be mine, one way or another. He turned, jammed his hat back on his head, and climbed into his buggy. He snapped the reins, and the buggy rattled away, leaving a cloud of insults and dust. Clara stood shaking, the adrenaline making her sick. Luke was crying quietly. She put her hand on his head, her body rigid. Eli still had not moved. He was watching the buggy disappear. You can go back to your work, she said. Her voice was brittle. He turned to her. His face was blank. He looked at her, then at Luke, then back at her. He nodded once, his gaze lingering on her pale, strained face. And then he walked back to the barn. The rage, the shame, the humiliation. It all boiled over. But it had nowhere to go. Rook was gone. So she turned it on the only person left. She stormed after him, marching into the barn. He was standing by the forge, his back to her, his shoulders set. Don't you ever do that again, she snapped. He turned slowly. Ma'am, don't you ever step in for me like that. I am not a child. I am not a damsel in distress. I can fight my own battles. Yes, ma'am. I don't need saving, she yelled, the words echoing in the dusty barn, startling the horses. "Least of all from you. I told you the terms. You are a ranch hand. That is all. You do not interfere." Eli watched her, his expression unchanging. He let her fury wash over him, a patient stone in a river. When she was finished, breathless and shaking, there was a long silence. "I didn't do it for you," he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear it. "What?" "I didn't do it to save you." He looked her straight in the eye. "I did it because no one deserves to be spoken to like that. Not on their own land. Not ever." Clara stared at him. His words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the anger clean out of her. It was not a defense. It was not an apology. It was a simple statement of fact, a moral line. He had not stepped in to protect her, the weak woman. He had stepped in because Rook was wrong. It was a distinction she had never considered. He had not saved her. He had defended her. No, he had defended decency. She had no answer for that, no defense. She was confused, emotional, and she felt the hot sting of tears, not of sadness, but of frustration. She had wanted a fight, and he had given her principle. She turned, her boots scuffing in the dirt, and stormed out of the barn. She did not stop until she reached the house, slamming the door behind her. She went to her room, fell onto her bed, and stared at the ceiling, her mind a tangle of confusion and an emotion she could not, or would not, name. Later that night, she could not sleep. The house was still, Luke breathing evenly in his small room. The encounter with Rook played over and over in her mind, his smug face, his oily voice. But layered over it was Eli, his silence, his reply. She got up and went to the kitchen for water. As she passed the window, she saw a light, a single, steady lantern glow, burning in the barn. Her first thought was anger. Was he smoking? Was he being careless? She pulled on her boots and a shawl and marched outside, her irritation masking a deeper curiosity. She approached the barn door, which was open a crack. She looked inside. He was not smoking. He was sitting on the hay bale, the lantern on the ground beside him, casting a pool of warm, yellow light. In his lap was her father's old saddle. It was a beautiful piece of work, tooled leather from Texas, but the stitching was coming loose on the seat. Eli was fixing it. His head was bent, his large hands working with a surprising, careful delicacy. He had a small awl, a needle, and a spool of heavy, waxed thread. He was not just patching it, he was restitching the entire seam. His movement slow, patient, and respectful. He was treating a dead man's saddle with more care than most men treated the living. She watched him for a long time, the cold night air wrapping around her. He was humming again, not the lullaby, but something else, something low and toneless. She went back to the house. The coffee pot was still warm from supper. She poured a second cup, added a spoonful of sugar she could not afford, and walked back to the barn. She pushed the door open. He looked up, startled, his hand instinctively moving to the awl. When he saw it was her, he relaxed, but his eyes were wary. "I saw the light," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "I brought you some coffee." He looked at the cup, then at her. He slowly put the saddle aside and stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. He took the cup from her. Their fingers brushed. This time, she did not pull away. "Thank you," he said. "That was my father's," she said, nodding to the saddle. "It's good leather, deserves to be cared for. You don't have to do that. I know." He took a sip of the coffee. "It's good, thank you." An awkward silence fell. She should leave. She should go back to bed. But she did not. Instead, she found herself gesturing to the hay bale. "Can I?" He nodded and sat on the overturned bucket. She sat on the bale, pulling her shawl tighter. They sat close, near the lantern, two small figures in the vast, dark barn. The smell of hay, old leather, and coffee hung in the air. The words came slow. "He was right. You know," she said, her voice small. "Rook." Eli sipped his coffee. He did not speak, but he listened. About my reputation. She stared into the darkness, at a spot on the wall. The town, they all think I'm a harlot. She waited for him to shift, to grunt, to offer some empty platitude. He did nothing. He just sat, his presence a quiet invitation to continue. So she did. The words tumbled out, hesitant and quiet, like stones dislodged by a small tremor. I was engaged. Once. Not to him. Not to Finch. She had never told this part to anyone. To a man named Thomas. He was a banker's son. We were to be married in the spring. What happened? Eli's voice was low. Not prying, just present. Nathaniel Finch came. He was charming. He said Thomas wasn't good enough for me. He said I was a flower blooming in the desert. He said all the things a lonely woman wants to hear. I believed him. I broke my engagement. I was with him. She choked on the words, the shame still fresh, still burning. And he left. His wife came. I was a fool, a naive, stupid fool. Thomas, he wouldn't even look at me. His family told everyone I was loose. Finch was a gentleman, they said, and I had tried to trap him. The town believed them. It's easier to believe a woman is wicked than a man is a liar. She finished, her breath trembling. She was exposed. Her ugliest, most painful secret laid bare in the lamplight. She finally looked at him, expecting to see judgment or pity. Eli was watching her, his face calm. He looked at her not as a ruined woman, but just as her. He nodded slowly. He was the fool, Eli said, simply. And you? She whispered, the question out before she could stop it. The lullaby, the scar. You're running from something. Eli looked down at his cup. He turned it in his big hands. The lantern light caught the silver in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes. I fought in the war, he said, his voice flat. The one back east. A lot of men did. I didn't stop fighting when it was over. He paused, his jaw working. After, I was drifting, in Missouri. I got in a dispute, a card game. The man, he cheated. But more than that, he said something about a woman. Clara watched him, holding her breath. It was like the war was still in my head. The rage. I saw red. I didn't think. I just reacted. I killed him. Not in a fair fight. I beat him. He died a day later. He looked up, his eyes haunted. A dark, cold place. It wasn't war. It was just murder. It haunts me. Every day. So I run. The barn was silent. 2 confessions, 2 traumas, laid bare between them. Her shame and his guilt. 2 broken, outcast people, sitting in the dark. She could feel the heat from him. He was only a foot away. His hand, the one that had held the awl, was resting on his knee. She watched it. A strong hand, a hand that could kill, and a hand that could gently teach a child to read. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand hovering over his. Her fingers ached to touch him, to feel that same, simple, human contact she'd felt in the storm. Her hand almost touched his. She leaned in, her body moving on its own, drawn by a force she did not understand. Gratitude, loneliness, a desperate need for connection. He saw the movement. His eyes widened, just slightly. As she leaned closer, he pulled his hand back. We shouldn't, he murmured. His voice was rough, pained. Clara froze, the spell broken. The shame came rushing back, hot and terrible. She was doing it again, reaching for a man, being the fool. She pulled back, her face burning. I'm sorry, Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. She stood up abruptly. I know, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. She turned and fled the barn, leaving him alone in the yellow light with her father's saddle and the ghosts of both their pasts. The shame of that night in the barn sat between them like a ghost. For a week, Clara could barely look at him. She spoke her orders to the chickens, to the porch post, to the air. He, in turn, retreated. He became, once more, just the ranch hand. He was quiet, efficient, and distant. He fixed the saddle, left it clean and oiled by the porch, and said nothing. The air was thick with words unsaid, with a gesture rebuffed, and with the raw, painful honesty of their confessions. But spring came, and spring in the high country is a tyrant. It waits for no one's shame. The thaw came hard, turning the dry gullies into muddy streams. The ground, frozen solid for 5 months, turned to a deep, sucking mud that pulled at boots and wagon wheels. The wind, which had been a blade of ice, now carried the scent of wet earth and pine, and with it the promise of endless work. The cattle, thin and ragged from winter, had to be moved to the higher pastures. The fences, downed by snowdrifts, had to be mended. The branding, which her father had not lived to see, had to be done. There was no time for awkwardness. There was only the work. Slowly, the shared burden of labor ground down the sharp edges of their last encounter. It was impossible to remain distant when you were both knee-deep in mud. Heaving a calf out of a bog, it was impossible to maintain a cold silence when you needed to shout a warning about a loose wire or a spooked horse. They began to ride side by side again. At first, it was a silent partnership. Clara would point. He would nod. He would ride left. She would ride right. They moved together, a practiced, efficient team. Then, one afternoon, while mending a fence line on the high ridge, a prairie dog, bold and fat, sat up on its haunches not 10 feet away and chattered at them, scolding them for their intrusion. Eli paused, the wire stretchers in his hand. He looked at the creature, and a low sound came from his chest. It was almost a laugh, a quiet rumble of amusement. "Got a lot to say for himself," he murmured. Clara, pulling a staple from her pouch, found herself smiling, a real, unguarded smile. "He thinks he owns the place. My father used to call him the mayor." Eli's gaze met hers. The shared, simple moment, the small, unforced laugh, broke the last of the ice. The ghost in the barn receded. After that, things were easier. They learned to move around each other. In the barn, in the corral, on the trail, with an ease that was almost like dancing. She learned to anticipate his needs, the hammer before he asked for it, a canteen of water before he wiped his brow. He learned to read her silences, the tight set of her jaw that meant the banknote was weighing on her, the soft look in her eyes that meant she was thinking of her father. They talked more, not of their pasts, not of their wounds. They talked of the land. They talked of the cattle, of the way the wind was shifting, of the signs of a late frost. They spoke of safe, solid things. And sometimes they laughed. Clara had forgotten what her own laugh sounded in the open air. It was a rusty sound, but Eli's quiet presence seemed to polish it. He had a dry, understated wit, and when she least expected it, he would make an observation that was so sharp, so true, that she could not help but laugh. And he, in turn, would watch her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips as if he, too, were remembering a long-forgotten skill. Luke, unbound by adult shame or memory, had adopted Eli completely. The boy was a shadow at the man's heels. "Eli, can I help?" "Eli, watch this." "Eli, did you see that hawk?" One evening, Clara came out onto the porch to find Eli sitting on the steps, patiently showing Luke how to use a whetstone. "No, not like that." Eli's voice was low. "Let the stone do the work. A long, even stroke. That's it. You're not fighting it. You're guiding it. An edge is a patient thing." Clara leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Luke was completely absorbed, his small face scrunched in concentration as he mimicked Eli's careful motions with his own jackknife. "You're good with him," she said quietly. Eli looked up, not startled, just aware. "He's a good boy. He listens. He calls you his big brother, you know," she said. Eli looked down at the stone, a flicker of something, sadness, or maybe just memory, passing over his face. He said nothing, but he placed his large hand over Luke's, guiding the boy's small fingers, showing him the angle. Clara's throat tightened. The next day, Eli took Luke out beyond the barn. Clara watched from the window. He was holding her father's old rifle. Her first instinct was to run out, to protest. That was her father's. Luke was too young, but she stopped. She watched. Eli was not just handing it to him. He was teaching him. He spent a long time, an hour, just showing him the parts of the rifle. How to load it, how to check it, how to clean it. He was teaching him respect. "This is not a toy," Eli's voice carried on the clear air. "This is a tool, a dangerous one. You never, ever point it at anything you do not mean to kill. You hear me? Not at a man, not at a friend, not even in a joke. This is for food, and this is for defense. That is all." "Yes, sir." Luke's voice was small and awed. Eli set up a row of tin cans on the fence, 100 feet away. He showed Luke how to stand, how to breathe, how to pull the trigger, not jerk it. Luke's first shot kicked up dirt 10 feet to the left. "You rushed it," Eli said calmly. "You were thinking about the noise." "Don't think about the noise. Think about the target. Breathe out. Slow and squeeze." Luke's second shot missed. His third, too. But on the fourth, a loud, satisfying plink echoed across the ranch. "I did it!" Luke shouted, jumping up and down. "You did," Eli said, and for the first time, Clara saw him smile. A full, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and erasing, for just a second, the weariness. "Now do it again." Clara turned away from the window, her heart a confusion of gratitude and a strange, deep ache. He was teaching her brother to be a man, a task she could never have managed. He was, day by day, becoming more than a ranch hand. He was becoming essential. The flash flood came, as they always do, with no warning. The sky had been a pale, washed-out blue all morning. Clara and Eli were in the South Canyon, a narrow, winding cut in the earth, checking on a spring. They were a good 2 miles from the ranch house, their horses tethered high on the ridge. Eli had been quiet all morning, his gaze constantly scanning the rocks above them, his nose in the air. "Something's wrong," he said, stopping. "What?" Clara looked around. The air was still. "The air, it's too heavy, and... smell that?" She sniffed. "Rain." "No," he said, his eyes narrowing. "That's not just rain. That's a storm. A gully washer. Somewhere up country." He scrambled up the side of the arroyo, climbing the loose scree to get a better look. He stood for a long moment, a tall silhouette against the pale sky. Then he turned, his face stark. "Run!" he yelled. "Now! Get to the horses! Run!" Clara did not question him. She had heard that tone in his voice only once before, in the lightning storm. She turned and scrambled, her heavy skirts catching on the sagebrush. She heard it before she saw it. A low, deep rumble, like thunder trapped underground. It was a sound of immense, terrible weight. She looked back. Eli was right behind her, his hand out. "Don't look back! Just climb!" She was halfway up the slope when the water hit the canyon. It was not a wave. It was a wall, a 10-foot-high wall of churning, brown water, sticks, and mud. It came around the bend with a roar, a liquid beast that devoured everything. It hit the canyon floor and exploded, the sound a deafening crack, like the earth itself was breaking open. The ground shook. Clara screamed, her feet slipping on the loose rock. She was going to fall. She was going to fall right into it. "Eli!" He was there. He grabbed her, not by the hand. He grabbed her around the waist, his arm a steel band, and lifted her. He bodily lifted her, his boots digging into the collapsing slope, and threw her upward onto a narrow ridge of rock, a small shelf just above the chaos. "Hold on!" he roared. He scrambled up after her, clinging to the rock face, and hauled himself onto the ledge just as the water surged again. The flood rose, slamming against the rock just inches beneath their boots, soaking them in an icy spray. They were trapped. The ledge was perhaps 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. Below them, a river of mud and debris, including a whole, uprooted pine tree, surged past. The roar was so loud they could not speak. Clara was pressed flat against the rock wall, her knuckles white, her body shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She was soaked, she was cold, and she was alive. Eli stood in front of her, shielding her with his body from the spray and the wind that now howled through the canyon. He was just there, solid, unmoving. He had saved her. Again. They stood there for an hour, or maybe it was an eternity, as the deadly river rushed beneath them. The water level dropped as quickly as it had risen, the surge passing, leaving a sucking, muddy torrent in its wake. When the water was a few feet below them, Eli finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "It's past. We have to move before dark." He helped her down, his hands strong and sure on her waist, lowering her to the slick, muddy bank. Her legs were jelly. She could barely stand. They found their horses terrified but safe, where they had left them on the high ground. The ride back was a silent, muddy, miserable affair. They were both soaked to the skin, and the spring evening was growing cold. Back at the ranch, they found Luke safe. He had been in the house, had seen the water in the distance, and had had the good sense to stay put. Eli took the horses, his face grim and set. Clara stumbled into the house, her body numb. She was so cold. She found him in the barn an hour later. She had changed into dry clothes, but a deep, bone-chilling shiver had set in. She had made a pot of coffee, her hands shaking. He was sitting in the tack room, under a makeshift tarp he had strung up to ward off the worst of the leaks. He, too, was in dry trousers, but he was shirtless, rubbing his arms and chest with a rough cloth. Clara stopped, her breath catching. She had not seen him like that. His chest and shoulders were broad, covered in a map of old, white scars. Not just the one on his jaw, a long one on his ribs, a puckered one on his shoulder. This was a man who had been hurt, badly, and had healed. He heard her, and looked up, his eyes wary. He did not reach for his shirt. I brought coffee," she stuttered, her voice thin. "Thank you." She handed him the mug. Their fingers touched. His hand was warm, but it was trembling, just slightly. He was as cold as she was. She sat on a nearby crate, pulling her own shawl around her. The shiver was worse now. She could not stop shaking. He watched her, his gaze sharp. He took a long drink of the coffee, then set the mug down. He picked up his coat, the heavy wool one he had worn in the storm. It was dry. He did not ask. He just stood up, stepped over to her, and wrapped the coat around her shoulders. It was huge. It enveloped her, and it smelled like him, like leather and horse, and a faint, clean scent of soap. "You're shaking," he said, his voice a low rumble. I can't get warm," she whispered, her teeth chattering. He hesitated. For just a second. He looked at her, his face a conflict of duty and a deeper, more complicated emotion. Then he sat down on the crate beside her. It was a small space. He was very close. He put his arm around her, pulling her against his side. "It's just the cold," he said, his voice quiet, as if reassuring a spooked horse. "It'll pass." She leaned into him. She could not help it. He was so warm. His bare skin radiated heat. She pressed her face against his shoulder, against the solid, scarred muscle, and just breathed. They sat like that for a long time. The silence in the barn was thick, broken only by the drip of water from the roof and the sound of her chattering teeth, which was, slowly, beginning to subside. He just held her. He did not stroke her hair. He did not whisper comforts. He just held, a solid, warm, living wall against the cold and the fear. She lifted her head. Her face was inches from his. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the deep lines around his eyes. His gaze was fixed on her mouth. Her breath trembled. The world seemed to stop. There was only the smell of him, the heat of him, the pounding of her own heart. This was it. This was the moment. He said nothing. He just looked at her. His eyes dark, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, he lifted his hand, Not to her face, not to her hair. He laid it, gently, over her hand, where it was clutching the coat. His thumb stroked the back of her hand. Once. A simple, grounding touch. It was not a rejection. It was a pause, a question. And she knew. In that moment, she was not ready for the answer. She was not ready to cross that line. Not yet. She pulled back. Just an inch. It was enough. The spell was broken. He dropped his hand and his arm from around her, but he left the coat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky, but not from the cold. "You're welcome," he said. They went back to the ranch, back to the chores, back to the pretense. They did not speak of the flood. They did not speak of the ledge, or the coat, or the long, charged silence in the barn. They pretended, as people do, that nothing had happened, but the tension was back. It simmered beneath every task, every shared glance, every polite, "pass the salt." It was a new tension, though, not of awkwardness, but of a knowledge of what had almost been. A week later, the letter came. It was from the bank in Cheyenne, delivered by a rider. Clara took it with a hand that had, she thought, finally stopped shaking. She was wrong. She read it, her blood turning to ice. It was not a warning. It was a notice. Silas Rook, it seemed, was not just using whispers. He was using the law. He had filed a formal claim against the ranch, a legal action, an old debt, one she had no knowledge of, signed by her father 3 months before his death, with Rook as the co-signer. He was claiming the entire ranch as collateral. She stared at the paper, at the legal, binding words. He was going to take it all. The land, the house, the cattle, everything. All her work, all her sacrifice. It was for nothing. She was going to lose. She walked out to the corral, the paper clutched in her hand. Eli was there, resetting a post. He saw her face. He dropped the hammer. "What is it?" She could not speak. She just handed him the letter. He read it, his face hardening, the scar on his jaw standing out, white and angry. He read it twice. "He can't," Eli said, his voice a low growl. "He can," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and hopeless. "He will. He has the law. He has money. I have nothing." Eli looked at the letter, then at her. His face was a mask of a cold, controlled fury she had never seen. "I should leave," he said, his voice flat. Clara looked at him, stunned. "What? This isn't about the debt. This is about you. This is about me." He crumpled the letter in his massive fist. "He's targeting you. He's using me as the excuse, the hired brute. If I'm gone, maybe he'll back off. Maybe he'll give you time." He was offering to leave, to disappear, to take his trouble, his past, and his presence, and remove it from her life, to save her. And in that moment, all the fear, all the pride, all the confusion, it all crystallized into one hard, undeniable truth. "No," she said. He looked at her. "No," she said again, her voice stronger, rough with emotion. She stepped toward him, close, her hands clenching at her sides. "You leaving won't solve this. He's wanted this land since before you came. He'll take it, whether you are here or not, and I—" She stopped. "You're part of this now," she said, the words costing her every last shred of her pride. You're part of this ranch." He stood for a long time, his eyes searching her face, reading the truth in her desperation. He nodded once. "All right," he said. "Then we fight." That night, she found him outside. He was not in the barn. He was on the small hill behind the house, the one that overlooked the valley, the one with her father's grave. He was just standing there, a tall, dark shape under a ceiling of brilliant, cold stars. She went to him, her heart pounding. She did not know what she was going to say. She just knew she could not be in the house, alone with her fear. She stood beside him. They looked out over the valley, their valley, dark and silent, sleeping under the moon. "It's beautiful," she whispered. My father, he loved this. He said it was the only place he could breathe." "I understand that," Eli said. They were silent for a long time. The conversation from the barn, their confessions, hung in the air between them. "What did you lose?" she asked, her voice quiet, daring. "The person who taught you that lullaby." He did not stiffen. He did not pull away. He just stared at the stars. "A wife," he said. His voice was empty. "And a son. They died of the fever, back in Tennessee, before the war. I was gone, looking for work." "Oh, Eli," she breathed, the word a pain in her chest. "I came home, and the house was empty. Neighbors had buried them a week before. I never even said goodbye." He closed his eyes. "That's when I joined the army. It didn't matter where I went." "And you've been running ever since," she whispered. "There's nothing to run to," he said. "Only away." They stood, two small, broken people, sharing a loss so profound it felt like it could swallow the stars, the dam of her control, the one she had so carefully built for 3 years. It just broke. A sob, a great, racking sound, tore out of her. "Clara, I can't," she wept, the tears streaming down her face, her body shaking. I can't do this. I can't fight Rook. I can't run this ranch. I can't be strong anymore. I'm so tired." She broke down, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. He did not touch her. Not at first. He just stood there. Then she felt his hand, warm and rough, cover hers, pulling it away from her face. He took her hand. He held it. "Then let me be strong for you," he said, his voice a low, rough vow. She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. She saw his face, the scar, the haunted eyes, the man who had lost everything. And she saw the strength he was offering. She did not think, she did not plan. She just acted. She stepped into him, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw, and she kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was soft, yes, but it was aching and desperate and full of all the need, all the fear, all the loneliness of the last 3 years. It was a kiss that said, "Please." It was a kiss that said, "Save me." He was still for a second. A sharp intake of breath. He was iron. He was stone. Then, slowly, with a restraint that was almost painful, he responded. His hand, the one holding hers, tightened. His other hand came up, not to her back, not to her hair, but to her arm, holding her, steadying her. His lips were firm and dry, and they tasted of coffee in the cold night air. He kissed her back, not with passion, but with a deep, slow, deliberate tenderness. It was a kiss of acceptance, of recognition. She pulled back, breathless, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. They stood, inches apart, their breath mingling in the cold, their hands still clash. They said nothing. The silence of the canyon, the stars, the world rushed in. Clara's voice was a ragged whisper in the dark. "This isn't just kindness, is it?" He looked down at her, his eyes, even in the shadow, seeming to see all the way to the bottom of her soul. "No," he replied, his voice rough. "It's the only good thing I've felt in years." The sun rose, and with it, Clara's shame, the kiss on the hill, her confession, her utter collapse in front of him. It all felt like a weakness, a desperate, needy gesture she could not take back. She had broken her own rule. She had shown her belly. She was at the stove before dawn, her movements jerky and angry. She slammed the cast-iron skillet, her back rigid. When he came in, quiet as he always was, she did not turn. "Coffee's on," she said to the wall. She felt him pause. She felt his presence in the small kitchen. A weight, a warmth she did not want to acknowledge. He did not speak, just poured a cup and went back outside to the porch. She avoided him all morning. She found chores in the root cellar. She reorganized the pantry. She scrubbed a floor that was already clean. She was ashamed of her vulnerability. of the raw, aching need she had shown. She had kissed him as a drowning woman. And now, in the harsh light of day, she felt like a fool. He gave her the space. He did not press. He did not follow. He simply worked. He took down the far fence line, his back to the house, a solitary, steady figure in the distance. He did not retreat emotionally. His presence was still a fact, as solid as the mountains. He was just waiting for her to be done with her panic. The fragile peace, such as it was, lasted 2 days. Eli had ridden out to check the northern water line, a small, diverted creek that fed their main trough. He had been gone for hours. Clara found herself by the window, watching the ridge, a knot of unfamiliar anxiety tightening in her stomach. Luke, sensitive to her mood, was quiet. They heard it at the same time, a shout, thin on the wind, then a crack, a gunshot. Clara's heart stopped. "Luke," she said, her voice a sharp command. "Get in the cellar. Lock the door. Do not come out until I get you." "But, Clara, now, Luke!" She grabbed the rifle from over the mantel. Her hands were not shaking. They were cold, steady. She was on the porch as Luke scrambled below. She saw him. He was staggering, not riding, but on foot, his horse limping behind him, reins dragging. He was holding a bloody rag to his head. She was off the porch before she knew it, running, the rifle forgotten in her hand. "Eli!" He looked up, his face a mask of mud and blood. "Stay back," he gasped. "They're gone." Who's gone?" She reached him, her eyes wide with terror, taking in the gash on his temple, the way his shirt was torn, the dark, bloody rip on his forearm. "Rook's men," he said, leaning on her. He was heavy. 3 of them. They were tearing out the head gate. They weren't expecting me. They shot you. Just to graze. He gritted his teeth as he put weight on his leg. One got a lucky kick. The other had a knife. She got him to the house. The adrenaline made her strong. She half dragged, half carried him to the kitchen, easing him into a chair. He slumped, his head hanging, blood dripping onto her clean floor. "Luke," she yelled. "It's safe. I need water, a lot of it, and the whiskey." She was not the trembling woman in the barn. She was a general. She tore his sleeve, her movements quick, efficient. The knife wound was deep, long, and bleeding freely. The graze on his temple was ugly, but the bullet had passed. Luke came, his face white, carrying the bucket and the bottle. "You did good," she said, not looking at him. "Go sit on the porch. Watch the ridge. Tell me if you see anything. Anything at all." "Yes, ma'am." He fled. She poured whiskey directly into the cut on his arm. He hissed, his whole body going rigid, his knuckles white on the table. But he made no other sound. She was all business. She cleaned the grit from the wound on his head. She stitched his arm, her stitches small and tight, just as she had seen her father do on a horse. She worked in a cold, silent fury. He had been hurt, on her land. For her. She finished. She wrapped his arm in clean bandages, then his head. She sat back, her hands, now, finally, starting to shake. The basin of water on the table was a dark, swirling red. She looked at the blood. She looked at him, his bruised face, his split knuckles, his eyes closed in exhaustion, and the cold, hard wall of her fury crumbled. The tears came, hot and silent, rolling down her cheeks. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "You could have died," she wept, the words muffled. "They had a gun. You could have died. For a water line?" She felt a hand, his hand, the one that wasn't bandaged, touch her hair. His fingers were rough, calloused, but the touch was so gentle it broke her heart. He stroked her hair, a slow, comforting motion. "Would have been worth it?" he whispered, his voice rough with pain. She looked up, her vision blurred. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were open, and in them, she saw no regret, only a deep, unwavering truth. That was what broke her. Not the fear, not the blood, but that he meant it. She leaned in, her hands coming up to frame his bruised face. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, pleading kiss on the hill. This was a claim. It was a kiss of anger and gratitude and a fierce, primal possession. It was deep and hot, and it tasted of blood and whiskey and a desperation that went beyond words. He responded instantly. His good arm came around her, pulling her from her chair, onto his lap, into him. His mouth was fierce, taking, giving, his control. The iron restraint she had always felt in him was gone. This was the man who had fought 3 men with his bare hands. She was the one who broke it, pulling back, breathless, her entire body trembling. His hand was tangled in her hair. His eyes were black with a raw, unprotected intensity. She stood up, her legs shaking. She took his good hand. She did not speak. She did not need to. She led him, wordlessly. He rose, unsteady on his feet, but his grip on her hand was iron. She led him out of the kitchen, down the short, dark hall, past her brother's empty room. She led him to her room, the room that had been her father's, and she pushed open the door. She led him inside and closed the door, shutting out the world, shutting out the dust, the debt, the blood, and the fear. It was not gentle. It was desperate. It was a collision. Their union was tender only in its absolute, raw honesty. She was trembling, not from fear, but from a need so profound it felt like a sickness. He was careful, his injuries a map of pain on his body, but his need for her, his need to claim her, was a fire. She clutched him, her fingers digging into his back. She clung to him as if he were salvation, a solid, living anchor in the raging flood of her life, and in the dim light of the afternoon, in the quiet of the small room. 2 broken people became, for a few short moments, whole afterward. They lay in the tangle of sheets. The sun was setting, painting the far wall in shades of orange and blood. The house was silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his bandaged arm stark white against his skin. She was curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. The silence was not awkward. It was heavy, settled. A thing had been done. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. He spoke first, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "I'll leave if you want me to." She lifted her head, her hair a wild tangle, and looked at him. His face was bruised, his eyes serious. He was offering her an escape, an annulment of what had just passed. He was giving her the choice to make him a mistake. She looked at this man who had fought for her, this man who had bled for her, this man who had, in the last hour, shown her a tenderness she had forgotten existed. "Don't you dare," she whispered. It was not a plea. It was not a request. It was an order, a vow. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. He raised his good hand, not to her hair, but to her face, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw, and he smiled, a small, tired, real smile. Life on the ranch changed. The lines were gone. He still slept in the barn, but it was a formality, a concession to the presence of her brother. But he ate every meal at her table. He sat on her porch in the evenings, not as a hand, but as a partner. They were a unit. They rode to town for supplies the next week. Eli's head was still bandaged. The stitches in his arm were still new. The town, which had always whispered, now shouted, "Mrs. Abernathy," the banker's wife, saw them on the boardwalk. Her face, a mask of sour piety, tightened. She grabbed her own daughter's arm and physically pulled her across the street, as if Clara's presence were a plague. Mr. Slocum, at the Mercantile, was worse. His eyes, small and assessing, slid from Clara's face to Eli's, and a smug, ugly smile touched his lips. "Flour, is it, Miss Stetson?" he said, his voice oily. "And beans, for you and your man. Just put them on the bill, Mr. Slocum," Clara said, her voice cold. Of course. Some women have no shame." A voice, loud and sharp, came from the dry goods aisle. It was Mrs. Slocum. Bad enough what she did with that Finch fella, but to take up, with her own hired hand, a drifter, a brute, a killer. I hear. Eli, who had been standing silent, his hands at his sides, went rigid, his good hand clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. Clara saw it. She put her hand on his arm, on the hard, bunched muscle. He looked at her, his eyes a cold, dangerous fire. It doesn't matter. Eli, she said, her voice loud and clear, carrying through the small, silent store. These people, their words are wind. But it did matter. She felt the sting of it. Not for herself, she was used to their scorn, but for him, they were branding him, tying him to her ruined reputation, making him an object of their contempt. That night, the doubt crept in. He was out late, checking the new calves, a task that now seemed doubly dangerous. She sat in the kitchen, her heart a heavy, cold stone. They were right about one thing. He was a drifter. He had a past, but he was a good man. He was the best man she had ever known. And she was destroying him. She was tying him to her land, to her scandal. She was a stain, and she was spreading to him. He deserved a clean start, a place where no one knew his past, or hers. He deserved better. Her mind made up, her heart breaking. She made a decision. She would not be the reason he was ruined. 2. She went to the barn. The air was cold, the smell of hay and leather a comfort that now felt like a betrayal. She lit the lantern. She went to his small, neat bunk, his 2 spare shirts, washed and folded, his extra trousers, his razor, her hands shaking. She folded them. She placed them neatly on top of his bedroll. She would give him his month's wages, what little she had, and tell him to go, to find a new life. The barn door creaked. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. He looked at her. He looked at the neatly packed bedroll. He stepped into the light. His face, which had been so soft with her, so open, was now a mask of stone. The scar on his jaw was a white line. "What are you doing, Clara?" His voice was quiet, deadly quiet. She flinched, her hands flying to her mouth. "Eli, What are you doing?" I'm protecting you," she whispered, the tears starting. "You heard them? In the town. They're saying things about you, they're calling you names. They look at you like you're no better than me. And you deserve a life," she cried, the words tearing out of her. Not this, not tied to me, to this ruined, failing ranch. You deserve to be free, to have a clean start. I can't be the one who ruins you, too." He crossed the space in 2 long strides. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her, his anger a palpable heat, a force that shimmered in the air. "And you," he said, his voice a low, shaking growl. "You're going to let them win? You're going to let those small, mean people tell you what to do? Tell me what to do." "I'm saving you," she sobbed. "From what?" He grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight, almost painful. "From me? From this? Do you think I care what those old women in the store say? Do you think I care what Slocum thinks? Do you?" He shook her, gently. "Don't," he said, his voice rough, breaking. "Don't you throw away what is real. Don't you dare throw this away. Us. Just because other people, because they are small, and they are mean, and they cannot stand to see you happy." He pulled her to him, his good arm wrapping around her, his bandaged one holding her head, pressing her face into his chest. "Their words are wind." "Clara," he murmured into her hair, "just wind. This is real. What we have, this is the only thing that's real." She sobbed into his chest, a broken, defeated, and utterly relieved sound. She clutched his shirt, her whole body shaking. He was right. He was right. A few days later, a fragile peace had settled. Luke, Clara, and Eli were on the porch, The sun was setting, a glorious bloody red. Eli, his arm healing, was showing Luke how to carve a small piece of pine, a bird. Clara was mending a shirt, her hands, for once, still. It was domestic. It was peaceful. It was a life she had never, ever imagined for herself. Luke, his small face scrunched in concentration, looked up. He looked at his sister. He looked at the tall, quiet man beside her. He looked at the way Eli's hand rested on the porch rail, close to Clara's. Luke smiled, a slow, wide, knowing smile. "He's good for you, Clara," he said, with the simple, profound, and often cutting honesty of a child. Clara's needle stopped. Her breath hitched. She looked at Eli. Eli did not look up. He just kept carving, a small, perfect feather emerging from the wood. But the corner of his mouth, the one on the unscarred side, ticked up in a small, private smile. The piece, of course, could not last. The rider from Cheyenne came again. This time, Clara's heart did not sink. She watched him approach. Eli, a solid presence at her side. "Another letter, ma'am," the rider said. Avoiding her eyes, she took it. It was not from the bank. It was from a law office, Rook's lawyer. She read it, her blood turning to ice. This was it, the official filing. Rook was suing to seize the land. He was calling in the debt, an old, forgotten loan, signed by her father in his sickest, most desperate days. A loan for $500, at an interest rate that was criminal, with a balloon payment she could never, ever make. And he had used the ranch, the whole ranch, as collateral. She sank onto the porch step, the paper trembling in her hand. It was over. All of it. The fight, the hope. It was all for nothing. "It's over," she whispered, the words empty. He tricked him. My father. He was sick. He wasn't thinking. It's over." Eli came and stood beside her. He gently took the letter from her limp hand. He read it. His face became granite. The man who had faced 3 of Rook's thugs, the man who had fought in a war, his face became a cold, calm, and terrifying mask. He tore the letter in half, then in quarters. He let the pieces fall to the dust at his feet. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with tears, uncomprehending. "Eli." He crouched in front of her, so he was at her level. He took her hands. His grip was strong, steady, and full of a power she had never felt. His gaze was afire. "No," he said, his voice a low, resonant vow. "It is not over." He looked at Luke, who was watching, white-faced. He looked back at her. "This is not just your father's ranch anymore. This is not just your home." He squeezed her hands. "This is our home now, and we will fight him. Together." His words, "This is our home now," were a vow. They were also a declaration of war. War required a new strategy. The next morning, they left Luke with a neighbor, Mrs. Hemphill, a stern, quiet woman who had known Clara's mother and who looked at Eli with a calculating, but not unkind, eye. She took the boy's hand and promised to keep him safe for 3 days. Clara and Eli rode for Cheyenne. It was a hard journey, a 2-day ride over a cold, high plains trail. The wind was a constant, scouring force, pushing at their backs, chapping their faces. They were in the saddle for 10 hours the first day, their bodies aching, their minds fixed on the legal paper in Eli's saddlebag. But the shared hardship was different now. It was not 2 separate people enduring, but a single unit. When they stopped to make camp the first night, under a sky so vast and clear, it felt like a cold, diamond-studded sheet. The silence was easy. He built a small, efficient fire. She made coffee and fried bacon. They sat close, his shoulder pressed against hers, sharing the warmth of the flames and a single, thick blanket he wrapped around them both. "You're cold," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I'm fine," she said, but she leaned into him, her head resting for a moment against his chest. He put his arm around her, his hand, warm and strong, resting on her waist. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, the silence a comfort. a fortress against the world that was trying to tear them apart. He kissed the top of her head, a simple, grounding gesture. In the midst of the risk, the fear, they found a brief, stolen joy. This simple, quiet moment, the feeling of his arm around her, was more real than any threat Rook could invent. Cheyenne was a shock. After the silence of the ranch, the city was a roaring, muddy, chaotic mess. Wagons choked the streets. Men in suits rushed along boardwalks, and the air was thick with the smell of coal smoke, horses, and whiskey. They found the lawyer's office on a side street. Mr. Alistair Finch, no relation to the other Finch, he assured them, with a thin, weary smile, was a man who looked like he was made of dust. His suit was dusty, his desk was dusty, and his eyes were tired. He read the letter from Rook's lawyer. He read the loan agreement Eli had brought. He grunted. "This is very specific. Miss Stetson, the terms are predatory. But on the face of it, it's legal. Your father signed it. The collateral is clearly stated." "But he was sick," Clara insisted. "He wasn't in his right mind. Rook, he tricked him." "A difficult thing to prove, ma'am." The lawyer sighed, rubbing his face. "Rook has a lot of friends in this town. But let me go to the debt office. Let me check the original filing." He told them to come back in the morning. They found a small inn, a clean but threadbare room with a single iron bed and a porcelain basin. Clara stood at the window, staring down at the street, her arms wrapped around herself. The noise of the city felt like an assault. "It's hopeless," she said, her voice small. "He'll say the same thing. It's legal." She felt Eli come up behind her. He did not speak. He just put his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs rubbing small, warm circles. He pulled her back against him, his body a solid wall. "We'll see in the morning," he said, his voice quiet, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Tonight, we're just here." That night, in the strange, small room, she could not sleep. Her mind raced, a carousel of debts and lawyers and fires. She trembled, the fear a cold, physical thing. Eli, lying beside her, simply reached out and pulled her close. He gathered her into his arms, her back against his chest, his bandaged arm resting protectively over her waist. He held her, his body a solid, warm presence in the dark. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere. Just rest. Let me hold you." And she did. She let his strength, his calm, steady presence, seep into her. She held his hand, the one that was scarred and strong, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. She felt safe. The next morning, the dust-covered lawyer had news. It was not good. "It's just as I feared," he said, not meeting their eyes. "Worse. In fact, I went to the clerk's office. I looked at the original filing." "And?" Eli asked, his voice flat. "It's perfect." The lawyer spread his hands. "Too perfect. The signature is clean. The date is filed. Just right. But I know the clerk down there. I know his habits. And Silas Rook. He's been very generous to the county fund this year." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the lawyer said, his voice low, "that Rook bribed the debt office. This document, it might be a clean forgery. It might be a deal your father signed under duress and was lost and replaced with this one. The truth, we'll never know. The system, Miss Stetson, is rigged against you. The paper is solid. The clerks will swear to it. You have no legal recourse, I can see. I'm sorry." The ride back was a silent, gray misery. The cold was deeper. The wind was a knife. Clara rode, her face a mask, her eyes fixed on her horse's ears. She had lost the law. The one thing she had hoped might be fair was just another tool for men like Rook. They were 10 miles from the ranch when she finally broke the silence. Her voice was dead, hollowed out. "We'll sell the cattle," she said. "What's left of them? It won't be enough to pay him." But it'll be enough to move. Eli said nothing, just kept riding. We'll take Luke, she continued, her voice mechanical. And we'll go west, Oregon, or California, somewhere no one knows us. We can start over. A new name. Eli stopped his horse. He just stopped. Clara rode on a few more feet before she realized he was not with her. She turned, her horse dancing nervously. He was watching her, his face granite. The setting sun lit the scar on his jaw, made it look like a fresh wound. You leave now, he said, his voice low. And you let him win. There's no other way. Eli, we lost. The law is on his side. To hell with the law, he roared, the sound exploding out of him, startling her horse. It was the first time she had ever heard him raise his voice in true, unrestrained anger. The law is a piece of paper. This is our home. You think running will solve it? You think Rook is the only man like that? You'll just find another one in Oregon. You'll run, and you'll keep running, and you'll teach Luke to run too. He rode up to her, his horse chest to chest with hers. He grabbed her reins. You asked me to stay. You told me this was our home. I am not running. Clara, I am done running. Then what? Eli, she cried, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. What do we do? We have nothing. We have this, he said, his voice a low growl. We have the land until he takes it. We have the truth, and we have each other. You leave now. You let him, and Slocum, and that whole mean, spiteful town. You let them chase you out. Is that the life you want? She stared at him, her vision blurring, her heart breaking. No, she whispered. Then we fight, he said, his gaze softening. He let go of her reins. But not in Cheyenne. We fight, here, on our land. They crested the high ridge at dusk, the ranch house a small, dark shadow in the valley below. What is that smell? Clara said, pulling her horse to a stop. Eli was already standing in his stirrups, his head up, sniffing the wind. Smoke, he said. Wood smoke, and hey. He looked down. Oh God, no. A small, orange glow was visible. Not from the house, from the barn. Eli! He was already gone, his horse plunging down the steep slope in a spray of gravel. Clara was right behind him. When they hit the valley floor, they saw it. It was not just smoke. It was fire. The hay barn, the big one, the one that held their entire winter feed, was a tower of flame, a roaring, monstrous thing painting the sky in shades of red and black. Luke! Clara screamed, her voice a raw, primal sound. She threw herself from her horse before it had even stopped, stumbling, her eyes fixed on the house. The house was dark. Safe. Luke! She screamed again. Clara, here! It was Eli's voice. He was not at the house. He was by the corral, near the burning barn. She ran, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. The heat was a physical blow, a wall that seared her face. Eli was dragging something. No, someone. It was Luke. He was coughing, his face black with soot, his eyes wide with terror. He's all right, Eli gasped, his own face scorched, his hair singed. He's all right. What happened? Clara fell to her knees, pulling her brother into her arms. Clutching him so tightly, he cried out, I saw the fire! Luke sobbed, clinging to her. It came so fast. I went to let the horses out. The mare. She was scared. A beam. It fell. It blocked the gate. I was trapped. Eli had plunged through the smoke and heat, vaulted the burning rail, and pulled the boy out from between the fire and the panicked horses. Just as a section of the roof caved in, sending a volcanic eruption of sparks into the night, the barn was a total loss. It collapsed in on itself, a giant, sighing roar, leaving nothing but a black, glowing ruin. Clara stood up. She held her sobbing brother. She looked at Eli, his face black, his shirt smoking, his hands raw and red from the heat. He had saved her brother. Rook had tried to kill her brother. Something inside her, the last small part of her that was afraid, that was shamed, that was willing to run. It turned to ash. It burned away in the heat of that fire, leaving behind a cold, pure diamond-hard rage. This was not about land. This was not about debt. This was about blood. She said nothing. Her face was calm, terribly calm. She kissed Luke on the head. "Go in the house. Wash your face. Stay there." "Clara," he whispered, frightened by her voice. "Go!" He ran. She turned to Eli. He was watching her, his expression wary. He saw the change in her. She walked past him, her boots crunching on the scorched earth. She did not go to the water trough. She did not go to the ruins of the barn. She went to the house. She walked inside, through the kitchen, to the main room. She went to the mantelpiece. She took down the rifle, her father's rifle, the one Eli had taught Luke to use. She stepped back onto the porch, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She broke the rifle, checked the load. She had one bullet. She snapped it shut. She started walking. Her strides were long, purposeful. She was not running. She was marching. "Clara!" Eli's voice was sharp. She did not stop. She had reached the property line, the gate that led to the road to town. He was in front of her, his sooty form blocking her path. "Clara, stop! Get out of my way! Eli!" Her voice was not her own. It was a flat, cold, dead thing. "No, he tried to kill my brother." She raised the rifle. "I am going to kill him." "And then what?" Eli did not flinch. He grabbed the barrel of the rifle, his scorched hand wrapping around the cold steel, and pushed it toward the sky. "They hang you. Rook's men kill you, or I hang for letting you. And Luke has no one. Rook wins. He wins. Clara." "I don't care," she hissed, her face a mask of fury, tears of rage streaming through the soot on her cheeks. "I do," he yelled, holding her by the shoulders, his grip iron, forcing her to look at him. "This is what he wants. He wants you to break. He wants you to be the ruined, crazy woman with a gun. He wants to be the victim. We do not do this his way. We do not do this in the dark, with fire and bullets." He held her, his gaze burning into hers, until the tremors in her body began to slow. "We do this right," he said, his voice low, intense. "We do it in the light. We do it together." He gently, firmly, took the rifle from her unresisting hands. The fire changed everything. It was no longer a rumor, a scandal. It was an act of war, witnessed by the valley. The next day, Clara and Eli did not ride to Cheyenne. They rode to their neighbors. They went to Old Man Hemphill first. He was a sour, tough man who had never liked Clara's father. He looked at the ruin of their barn, at Eli's bandaged hands, at the cold resolve in Clara's eyes. "He did this," Clara said. It was not a question. "Aye," Hemphill said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Rook's been squeezing me for years, diverted my water, the legal way. My creeks run dry." "Speak for us," Eli said. "Speak for yourself. He burned us out. He'll do the same to you." They rode to the widow Douglas. Her husband had died accidentally on a cattle drive organized by Rook's foreman. She had sold her land to Rook for 10 cents on the dollar, just to get away. "I'm afraid," she wept. "So are we," Clara said, taking her hand. "But he almost killed my brother. I am not afraid enough to run. Not anymore." One by one, they gathered them. A small, ragged army of the intimidated. The ranchers whose fences had been cut, the farmers whose crops had been trampled, the men who had been threatened, the women who had been scorned, people who had been too scared to speak alone. They marched into town. Not with rifles, with their stories. They went to the council, to Mr. Abernathy, the banker, who was also the head of the council. "This is a legal matter. Miss Stetson," Abernathy said, his face impassive. "It is a moral matter." Eli's voice cut through the room. "And it's a matter of public safety. Silas Rook burned that barn. He almost killed a child. He is a threat." The council, seeing the grim, angry faces of a dozen landowners, agreed. A public hearing was set. The next day, the meeting hall was packed. Every soul from Larum's Point and the surrounding valley was there. It was hot, suffocating, and silent. Rook was there, in the front row, a smug, confident smile on his face, his lawyer at his side. Clara stood up. Eli stood with her, his hand on the small of her back. A simple, solid, public declaration. She was not the shamed woman of Laram's Point. She was not the grieving daughter. She was Clara Stetson, owner of the Stetson Ranch, and she was not alone. "Silas Rook," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to the back of the room, "has been trying to steal my land since my father died." She told them everything: the legal threat, the men at the waterline, the confrontation on her porch, and the fire. She spoke, her voice never wavering, her eyes locked on the council members. "He did this," she finished, "because I would not sell, because I am a woman, and because he thought no one would stand with me." The room was silent. Then Eli spoke, his voice low and steady. "I have one more witness." He looked at the back of the room. Luke Stetson walked, his small boots echoing, down the center aisle. He was terrified, his face pale, but he walked. He stood in front of the council, a piece of paper trembling in his hand. He looked at his sister. He looked at Eli. He took a deep breath. "My name is Luke Stetson," he read, his voice cracking but clear. "This is my home, my father. He died. Clara, my sister, she takes care of me. We were alone. Then Mr. Rook, he tried to make us leave." He looked up from his paper, his eyes finding Rook in the front row. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a small, hot spark. "And then Eli came," he said, his voice stronger. "He saved our cattle. He saved me. From the fire. Mr. Rook started that fire. He tried to burn us. But we are a family. Eli and Clara and me. And this is our home. And you can't have it," he finished, his small body shaking. He crumpled the paper in his fist. The hall was tomb silent. The town elders, the men who had known Clara's father, the women who had gossiped about her. They looked at Luke. They looked at Clara, standing tall, her hand now holding Eli's. And they looked at Silas Rook. And for the first time, they were not looking at a wealthy, powerful benefactor. They were looking at a man who would burn a child to get what he wanted. Mr. Abernathy, the banker, looked down at his desk. Mrs. Abernathy, in the front row, looked for the first time ashamed. The tide, slow and heavy and undeniable, was beginning to turn. Silas Rook did not attend the hearing second day. He did not wait for the council's verdict. He was a man who had built an empire on fear, and for the first time, he had felt that fear turn back on him. He had seen the look in the eyes of the townspeople. It was not just disapproval. It was contempt. He had seen the cold, steady gaze of Eli Mercer, a man who had not been broken by fire. He saw his power, built on bribes and whispers, crumbling to dust. And in that ruin, his arrogance curdled into a black, desperate rage. He had not lost. He could not lose. Not to a ruined woman and a half-dead drifter. Eli was riding the canyon ridge 2 days later, checking the spring line, the one Rook's men had first sabotaged. He was still in pain. His hands were wrapped in clean bandages, the burns raw and red. His arm ached where the knife had gone deep, but the work had to be done. The air was clear, the sky a vast, sharp blue, and for the first time in a decade, Eli Mercer was not running. He was planning. He was thinking of new fence lines, of a new roof for the barn, of the look in Clara's eyes when she'd held his hand in the town hall. He heard the scrape of a boot on rock. He did not have time to turn, to reach for the rifle in his scabbard. Something hard and heavy slammed into the back of his head, a club or a rifle butt. He fell from the horse, his world exploding into white, hot pain. He landed hard on the unforgiving rock. The breath knocked from his lungs, through the swimming, sickening haze. He looked up. Silas Rook stood over him. Not his men, Rook himself. His face was not the smug, controlled mask of the landowner. It was a purple, sweating mass of unrestrained fury. He was holding a heavy piece of driftwood, like a club. "Brute!" Rook spat, his voice a wet growl. You think you can take what is mine? You think you can stand with her and turn the town against me?" Eli tried to move, to get to his feet. His legs felt like water. His vision was doubled. He tasted blood and dust. I I built this valley, Rook screamed, his voice cracking. It was mine. Then you came. A nobody. A killer. He swung the club again. Eli rolled, a desperate, clumsy movement. The wood glanced off his shoulder. A sickening crack of bone. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound. You cost me everything. Rook was weeping now, fat, angry tears rolling through the sweat on his face. He was unhinged. He dropped the club and fumbled inside his fine coat. He pulled out a small, pearl-handled derringer, a coward's gun. He leveled it at Eli, his hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. I'll kill you. I'll kill her. I'll burn it all. It's mine. Eli looked at the shaking gun, at the man behind it, and in that moment, he felt no fear, only a cold, clear certainty. He was not going to die here. He was not going to let this man, this broken, pathetic man, take him from her. As Rook fumbled with the hammer, his thumb slipping on the pearl, Eli moved. He lunged from the ground, a low, powerful thrust, not at the gun, but at Rook's knees. He drove his good shoulder, the one that was not broken, into the thick man's legs. Using all his weight, all his rage, Rook shrieked as they both went down. The derringer fired. A pathetic pop, the bullet whining off into the sky. They fell onto the narrow ledge. A tangle of limbs. Rook was heavy and soft, but he was in a frenzy. He clawed at Eli's face, his fingernails digging in. He bit. He sobbed. He was a cornered animal. Eli felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his side. Again and again. Rook had a knife, a small, thin boot knife. Eli roared, a sound of pure animal rage. He grabbed Rook's wrist, the one with the knife, and slammed it against the rock. He slammed it again. The bone snapped. Rook screamed, a high, thin sound. The knife fell, skittering over the edge. Eli was on top of him. His vision was gray. The world was a roaring sound. He could feel the hot, wet blood pouring from his side, from his head. He had one good arm. He raised his fist, his raw, bandaged, burned hand. He hit Rook in his soft, terrified face. He hit him again. He saw the faces of his lost wife, his lost son. He saw the face of the man he had killed in Missouri. He saw the flames of the barn. He saw Luke's terrified eyes. He saw Clara, her face stained with soot, her eyes full of tears. "This is our home," he growled, each word a blow. He raised his fist one more time, and then he stopped. Rook was a bloody, sobbing mess beneath him, his eyes rolling back. He was broken. Eli looked at his fist, at the blood on the bandages, his own blood, and Rook's, and he saw the man he had almost become, the man he had been running from. He rolled off, gasping, the world spinning, turning black at the edges. He lay on his back, on the cold stone of the ridge. He heard a sound, a scrambling, pathetic sound. He saw, through a dimming haze, Silas Rook on his hands and knees, one arm dangling uselessly, crawling away, sobbing like a child. Then there was only the wind, and the pain, and the vast, empty sky. And then, nothing. Clara knew. She knew in the way she now knew the land, the sky, the turn of the wind. He had been gone for 3 hours, a 2-hour ride. She had just put a pot of beans on the stove when the feeling came, a cold, sharp, sudden hollowing in her chest, as if a rope that had tied her to the earth had been cut. "Luke," she said, her voice calm, too calm. "Ma'am? Stay in the house. Bar the door. Do not open it. For anyone. Not even me. Not until I call. Clara, what's wrong?" "Do it. Luke." She did not take the rifle. She took the mare. The fast one. She did not ride. She flew. She rode for the canyon ridge, her heart a cold, hard knot. She did not let herself think. She did not let herself feel. She just rode. She found his horse first, grazing placidly near the spring line, its reins tangled. "Eli!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Eli!" Only the wind answered, She dismounted, her legs shaking. She saw the signs of the struggle, the scuffed earth, the dark, wet splashes on the rock. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She followed the trail of blood. A small, terrible-to-follow line. She found him 20 yards away, near the edge. He was a ruin. He was lying in a pool of blood, his face a mask of purple and red, his bandages soaked through. He was so still. "Eli," she whispered. She touched his face. He was cold. "No," she said, her voice rising. "No, you can't." She put her ear to his chest, to the bloody, torn shirt, faint. It was there. A slow, shallow, thready beat. So quiet, but it was there. "You are not," she said, her voice a low, feral growl. "Leaving me. Do you hear me? I will not let you die." The next hour was a blur of impossible, desperate strength. He was a dead weight, a man of 200 pounds, and she was a woman of 130. But she was not just a woman. She was a fury. She got him to his knees. He moaned, a sound that was barely human. "That's it," she sobbed, pulling, heaving. You will help me. You will not die." She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, to the horse, the mare, smelling the blood, shied and reared. "Stand!" Clara screamed at the horse, her voice a sound the animal had never heard, and the horse, terrified, stood. How she got him on the horse, she would never know. It was a miracle of rage and love. She got him draped over the saddle, his head hanging on one side, his legs on the other. She tied his hands to the stirrups, his feet to the cinch. She climbed up behind the saddle, her arms wrapped around his bloody, unresponsive body, and she rode. She did not ride fast. She walked the horse, her whole body aching, her tears soaking the back of his shirt. She sobbed, but her sobs were a prayer, a threat, a promise. She refused to let him die. She held him to the horse, and she held him to life by the sheer, unbending force of her will. He recovered slowly. The doctor from Laram's Point, a young, scared man who had replaced the old drunk, came and went. He set the shoulder. He stitched the knife wounds in his side. He shook his head. "He's lost a terrible amount of blood. Miss Stetson," the doctor said, washing his hands. "His body. It's been through so much. The burns, the first attack, and this. I've done what I can. The rest is up to God and him." "God can wait," Clara whispered, her eyes never leaving Eli's face. She did not leave his side. For 3 days, he did not wake. He lay in her bed, a still, pale, bandaged figure. She washed him. She held water to his cracked lips. She changed his bandages, the smell of blood and laudanum filling the small room. Luke was a silent, pale ghost. Bringing her coffee she did not drink. Broth she did not eat. She sat in the chair beside the bed, her hand clutching his hand, the one that was not broken, was so cold. "You come back," she whispered into the still, dark room, her voice right. "You come back. Eli Mercer, I'm not done with you. We have a barn to build. We have a life. You promised to be strong for me. Now you be strong. You fight." She laid her head on the bed, her hand in his, and she cried, her tears of fury and fear finally giving way to a deep, aching exhaustion. On the 4th morning, she woke with a stiff neck, her head still on the mattress. She felt a pressure. She looked. His fingers, the ones she was holding, had tightened. She looked at his face. His eyes were open. Just a slit. They were hazy, unfocused, but they were open. "Clara," he breathed, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "I'm here," she wept, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm here, Rook," he whispered. "Hush. It doesn't matter. Just rest." He's gone," she said, her voice hardening. "They found him, crawling on the road to Cheyenne, broken, babbling. They took him to the asylum in Laramie. He's done the council's ruling," which came a week later. was a formality. Mr. Abernathy himself rode out to the ranch. He found Clara on the porch, mending a shirt. He saw, through the open bedroom window, the bandaged form of Eli Mercer, propped up on pillows, watching her. "Miss Stetson," Abernathy said, clearing his throat, his hat in his hand. "Mr. Abernathy, the council, we have ruled in your favor. Of course, the debt agreement has been... It's been ruled fraudulent. Mr. Rooks. Ah, his other dealings have come to light. His assets. They are forfeit. I see. The bank, the town. We would like to offer our deepest apologies and our help to rebuild." Clara looked at the man who had sat silent while she was scorned, the man who had let Rook run his town. She saw the respect in his eyes, the fear, the pity. She stood up. She felt taller. She was not the same woman who had slunk through his town. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice clear and cold. "But we will rebuild on our own." He nodded, ashamed. "Of course, ma'am." He turned to go. "Mr. Abernathy," she said. He stopped. "The town," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Can keep its opinions. I'm not interested in them anymore." He nodded, his face red, and he rode away. They did rebuild. It was slow. Eli was weak for a long time. He graduated from the bed to the porch, where he sat, his hands finally free of bandages, and watched. He watched Clara and Luke. He watched them clear the wreckage of the barn. He watched them try to mend the corral. After a week of this, he could not take it anymore. He stood up, his legs shaking. "That post," he said, his voice still rough. "It's not set right. You're not tamping it." Clara dropped the heavy tamping rod. She and Luke were covered in sweat and mud. She marched over to him. "You," she said, "are supposed to be resting." "I can't," he said, his hand clutching the porch rail. "I can't just sit. Let me help." "No." "Clara." "No." She stepped up to him, her face inches from his. "You will sit. You will heal. You will follow my orders. Ranch hand." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the smudge of dirt on her nose, and he smiled, that slow, real smile that crinkled his eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He healed. The work, the land, her food, her presence, they healed him. He was scarred. He would always be. The knife wounds in his side, the dent in his head, the broken shoulder, they left their marks. But his eyes were clear. The shadows were gone. They worked, side by side. They rebuilt the barn. Smaller, stronger. The neighbors, ignoring Clara's words, came. They came with timber. They came with food. They came, one by one, and they did not offer pity. They offered help. Old man Hemphill, his sour face set, spent a week helping set the roof beams. He never said a word, but he did it. The ranch, which had been a place of survival, of grief, became a place of hope. Their bond, forged in silence, in shared confessions, in storms and in blood. It was unshakable now. It was a thing as solid as the mountains. It did not need words. It was in the way she handed him a cup of coffee. It was in the way his hand rested on the small of her back as they walked in from the fields. It was real. One morning, late in the summer, when the land was golden and the air was turning crisp, she found him in the corral, the one where they had first met. She had been so cold. He had been so distant. He was just standing there, watching the horses. "Eli?" she said, walking up to him. He turned. He was not smiling. He looked nervous. She had never seen him nervous. He started. He fumbled in his pocket. I'm not a man of words. Clara, you know that. I don't have anything. No land. No money. You have your life, she said, her throat tightening. We have our life, he corrected her, his voice low. He pulled his hand from his pocket. I've I've lost so much. I'm afraid of losing this. He looked at her, his eyes, those war-worn, haunted eyes, now so clear, so open, so full of love. I don't want to ever lose you. He opened his hand. In his palm, his scarred, rough, strong palm, was a ring. It was not gold. It was not silver. It was wood. A simple, thin band of dark, polished pine. The wood he had been teaching Luke to carve. It's not gold, he whispered, his voice thick. But it's real. It's from the land. Our land. She did not say anything. She could not speak. The tears just came. Not the tears of rage or fear or grief, but tears of joy. A feeling so new, so profound, it stole her breath. She took the ring. She looked at it. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She raised her hand that was calloused and strong, and she put it on her own finger. Then she rose on her toes, her hands cupping his scarred, beloved face, and she kissed him, softly, sweetly, a kiss of forever, in the corral, in the dust, in the place where it had all begun. They married 3 days later, as the sun was setting. They did not go to town. They did not go to a church. They stood under the lone pine tree on the hill, beside her father's grave. It was not a sad place. It was a place of foundation. Clara wore her mother's dress, a simple, ivory-colored gown she had found in a trunk. Eli wore a clean shirt. Luke stood before them. He was not reading from a book he could barely decipher. He was just speaking. He was reading the vows Eli had painstakingly helped him write. We are gathered here, Luke said, his voice high and clear, the only sound in the vast, quiet world. To make a family, a real one. Clara, you promise to love Eli and take care of him when he's being stupid and fighting. Clara laughed, a sound that carried on the wind, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. I do, she said, her eyes shining with tears, fixed on Eli's. And Eli, Luke continued, his own eyes serious. You promise to love Clara and be strong for her and be my brother. Eli's voice was rough. He cleared his throat. He did not take his eyes off Clara. I do, he said. Then you're married, Luke declared. Eli did not wait. He pulled Clara to him, and he kissed her. A long, deep kiss that held all the promises of the land, of the sky, of the life they had, together, bought with blood and tears and fire. The final scene, the one that stays, is not one of drama. It is one of quiet. It is dusk. Months later, the first snow is on the high peaks, and the wind, that high, lonely Wyoming wind, howls over the ridge. It's a cold, mournful sound, but on the porch of the small, solid ranch house, there is a yellow, warm light. Eli is sitting on the porch step, his shoulders broad in his wool coat. Luke is beside him, their heads bent together over a piece of wood. Eli's hand, his scarred hand, is guiding Luke's, his quiet voice a low, patient rumble, teaching him to carve. The wind howls, but inside their little circle of light, there is warmth. Clara stands in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, a mug of coffee in her hands. She is not the hard, brittle woman who hired a drifter. She is not the shamed, ruined girl. She is home. She watches them, her husband, her brother, her family. She whispers, so low that only the wind could hear. You were never just a ranch hand. Eli pauses, his knife still. He looks up, over his shoulder, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. He smiles, that slow, quiet smile that is hers. and hers alone. And you, he answers, his voice a quiet, true vow. We're never just surviving. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it found you well. Wherever you are in the world, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. It would mean the world to us if you subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one. And please, share your thoughts in English. What did you feel? What part of this story will stay with you? We would love to hear from you.